Arun is an English teacher from North London. His words appear in the London Reader, a gallery in Cardiff with LUMIN Journal, and the Best New British and Irish Poets 2019 to 2021. He was a participant in Waterloo Press's Lit Up Poets of Colour mentoring scheme, where his debut pamphlet, I Want to Be the One You Think About at Night, was published by Waterloo Press. So over to you, Arun, when you're ready.
Thank you very much, Carmela. So I'm just going to go share my screen now. Hopefully everyone can see that. So thank you everyone for attending my very first artist talk this evening. So I'm just going to tell you about my journey into writing poetry, how my artistic career is going so far, and any upcoming projects that I have. So while we wait for the slide to go to the next one, I'm going to begin with a quote from Bernardine Evaristo, who is a brilliant writer. So she won the prestigious Booker Prize Award for 2019 for Girl, Woman, Other. And she talks about how what we do as writers is that we teach what we know. So we talk about how we impart our own understanding of literature onto the next generation. And I thought that was quite poetic when I was kind of researching for this artist talk, because I'm an English specialist in a secondary mainstream school. And I think what I want to do in the classroom is, of course, be enthusiastic about literature, but also have my kind of own background and my own ways of thinking about literature and applying it to the classroom. Sometimes that can be quite detrimental or quite suffocating when I'm doing it in a classroom context, but I become more fascinated and more alive when imparting my knowledge of literature in after-school programs. So, there we go. I think that quote was there. Yeah, so just in terms of the context, what it says here, and that what I was talking about in terms of imparting my knowledge of literature onto the next generation. So I decided to pull this image from Google Images because I have an absolute love for language, and I've always had that since I was a child. Because I used to eavesdrop a lot in public places. So basically, I would kind of tune my ear to evocative phrases or the way that normal people or ordinary people would be using language in everyday contexts. And I still do this now, but more with an intention and a purpose. So I would kind of use these phrases, either store them in my head or write them down in my notebook and journal. And then I would kind of mull over them throughout like a couple of days and then use them as stimuli or prompts in my work. And yeah, I even do that now to this day. And I just thought, because my love for language is all about how we kind of use language for multiple meanings, and also how even one word can bring about so many emotions in a person. I just like dissecting language and the roots of them as well. So before I kind of get into poetry, I have to talk about my exploration and creative endeavors. And that starts off with my love for horror films and for the supernatural and gore as well. So at this time when I was a teenager, my thing was creating horror films, or like horror short films, or writing speculative fiction. So speculative fiction is an umbrella term for genres like magic realism, the supernatural, and other kind of non-reality based subject matter. And I think the reason why I didn't kind of get into poetry as a teenager is because I didn't feel like I could connect with the poetry that I was being taught in school. Not to say that they're not kind of important pieces of literature, but it's the fact that they were coming from a place where I didn't really feel I could connect to. And I think I came to poetry at the right age, towards the later parts of my teenage years, at the right time to be influenced by the writers who have such an impact on me now, which I don't think I would have had that same level of impact when I was a teenager discovering poetry. I also didn't have anyone cool enough to show me what all the cool poets were doing at that time, or how they were talking about race, gender, or any other identity politics as well. So my thing was basically creating short films, horror films, and writing speculative fiction. And I really liked the way that the horror genre, especially the directors in the 80s specifically, were using like intended crafts, or kind of really kind of mapping out where they want to draw and elicit emotional responses in their audiences. And I tried to kind of emulate that in my work as a teenager. So now I'm just going to talk about my exploration into film. So I remember creating a trilogy called Twisted, which is about a serial killer hunting his biological family because he was adopted as a child, and he was kind of resentful towards all those family members who kind of gave him away or put him away. And I think it's really a rehash of the TV program Harper's Island. So I wasn't really that creative, but I kind of also used to make film trailers. So I made a trailer for the Twisted franchise. And also I kind of used stop motion with my action figures at the time. So I would create all these really cool scenes with like fake blood. And also there was one scene where I kind of just did a decapitation scene, which was really fun to make, but also really messy. But also at this time, I would be making movie posters as well, or kind of like teaser posters using Photoshop, which was what we had at school at the time as well, which made it really easy for me to create all these kind of wonderful posters during my lunch breaks or after school. But I also kind of used a filmmaking program called Celtics, and I also have the Guerrilla Filmmakers Pocket Guide as well. And so what I did during that time was I actually made my first ever film script, which was about angels battling demons on Earth, which was kind of really cliche when I think about it right now. But what I found was really helpful for me back then was that I actually learned the process of creating a script and actually managed to change that into a short piece of fiction, which I actually sent into the prestigious Costa Short Story Awards, which is a prestigious awards where writers in their mid-careers kind of send in their work, and they're really sophisticated. And then here's me, a 15-year-old with not much experience of writing fiction, but also wanting the attention and the recognition of getting awards. So obviously I didn't get shortlisted, and obviously I was a bit heartbroken, but I really admire my ambitious nature, which I've always had with me. And it's always kind of helped me in situations like that to be a better writer. And I think that was just necessary for me as a writer to kind of lead me onto the path of discovering and writing poetry. So here are 3 images of my journal from when I was 15, my guitar that I played and learnt from primary school, and also just a random image of a keyboard from Google Images, because I couldn't actually find the image of my actual keyboard. But all of this is relevant because this is how I first got into poetry, through writing song lyrics and through composing music. What I really liked about the artists that I was listening to at the time when I was a teenager was the fact that they used such simplistic language and really effective syntax and tone. And what I try to aim to do in my work is to try and make sure that I'm making it accessible for everyone, so that the most advanced reader could get something, and for someone who doesn't like reading could also get something from it as well. Obviously, I can't control how people react to my work, but as long as they're reacting, that is the impetus for me to kind of continue. So at this time, I was kind of emulating the sort of artists who I was fascinated with and their lyrics. And as a result, I kind of ended up with lots of kind of cringy songwriting from a very angsty teenager, which I will not be sharing tonight because that would just be the death of me. So I'll just give you a visual image of this notebook here. And so you can just imagine all the kinds of really cringy song lyrics that could pop up in that journal. I think I also wrote some really kind of revolting similes as well. So yeah, moving on. So I think a defining moment in my writing fiction phase was when I was in my A-level English literature class, and I created a piece based on what we were studying. So we were studying World War I literature, and we were studying Sebastian Faulk's Birdsong. And so what I did was that I created a piece of fiction around the two main characters and what happens to them after kind of a time gap in the novel. And my English literature teacher was like really impressed with the writing that I did. And I was impressed as well because of her response. And so that was kind of the moment where I was like, okay, now I always wanted to study English at university anyway. My academic credentials at school was always really thin. It was always the essay writing subjects or the expressive art subjects, and of course, English. So I always knew I wanted to study English at university. But I didn't realize that I could actually study creative writing. And at this point, or at the time, I just didn't really think I would make a career out of being an artist. But I think when I applied for university at this time, it was more just of the love of writing and the need to explore different forms. But I didn't really think that I was going to kind of go straight into poetry just yet. So I like to use this quote from W.H. Auden, who's one of my favorite poets. He basically is a poet who wrote funeral blues. And sorry about that. So he's a poet that wrote funeral blues, and basically he talks about how all I have as an artist is a voice to undo the folded lie. And I intentionally misappropriate what he says here and just reapply it to what it means to me. So basically this quote is just saying that all I have is a voice, and no one can emulate that, no one can manipulate or kind of take that away from me. And as long as I'm being true to myself and expressing my ideas and my thoughts and how I feel about my place in the world, that no one can really take that away from me. And so this mantra, as I call it, has been with me since I was a teenager as well, like discovering how important it is to me and how I relate to it. But before I go into how university has helped me expand my mind and get me involved in writing different forms, I just want to talk about the many people or the many artists that have influenced me from university and beyond. We've got a whole range of artists spanning from plays, music, TV, film, literature, and the sizes of the images are not indicative of how much influence they've had on me. But if you notice clearly, Shakespeare is the smallest. Moving on. So I just want to also talk about my first examples of poetry, and I did this through experimental writing. So this is what I was being taught at university. And so these are my two very first examples of my experimental writing phase. So the first piece on the left is called Noses, and it's basically a commentary about how growing up, what was kind of enforced, the idea of what made people look normal or what was normal was kind of European features. And so I just wanted to explain and maybe just explore that sometimes it's someone who is not of that caliber can also feel isolated and kind of feel disenfranchised with it as well. But this poem is just about an acceptance of my ancestral features. The second poem is my venture into like dark humor. I love dark humor anyway, but this kind of experimental piece isn't about me or isn't anyone I know. I just felt really obnoxious at the time, and I just wanted to kind of put that in there. So yeah. So these are my two other pieces as well. So Nocturnal and Lullaby. So I'm just going to talk about Lullaby kind of briefly as well. So Lullaby is based on a Mauritian slave song. So I'm a descendant of Mauritius. And basically it roughly translates to one must earn one's living. And so I thought when I tried to kind of project this onto kind of my garden slabs, something that's quite concrete, I always thought like how whenever we see words on the screen or words on a page, it's kind of easy to kind of just forget about them or dismiss them or ignore them. But when something is kind of projected onto something that's concrete, I think it becomes a bit more tangible perhaps, and it becomes a bit more like you're surrounded in that space. And so I just wanted to kind of make sure that I've got this projected onto something concrete to kind of raise the awareness of the importance of the message of the song, of how it explores about labor and how it explores about family, because this slave song is about a grandmother to their grandchild. And moving on. So much of the work that I do with projection is inspired by Jenny Holzer. She's a fantastic artist based in the US. And I just really love how she projects her words onto kind of established buildings. And I try to kind of emulate that here with this experimental piece called Boxes. And as you can see, hopefully, the words are saying outside the box to kind of identify the dangers of trying to fit into a box or someone's perceived notion of a box, and how standing out of the edges of something confined and something that was made for you is really important to kind of establish yourself as a person. So here are more examples of experimental writing. So They is featured in my pamphlet, I Want to Be the One You Think About at Night. And Speech Bubble is basically quite an old piece, but if I were to perform it, I would kind of name the various punctuation names involved. And I think if I were to perform it in any space, I think I would just leave with like really, really dry throat and not be talking for days for God knows how many punctuation marks there are in there. And next are two very important pieces as well. So I've got The Day the Zombie Died, which is after Frank O'Hara's The Day the Lady Died, where he talks about the death of Billie Holiday, the singer, the blues singer. And I talk about the death of George A. Morero, who's the godfather of the zombie. So if you know me, you know that I really love zombies. I've been such a big fan of zombie video games, zombie films, etc. for a long time. And so I was quite lost when George A. Romero died, because I just saw him as this really big figure on my kind of artistic life. And this poem is actually what I was doing in real life situation. And I wanted to kind of capture the fragmented sense of time and place and mind in this poem. On the right, we've got a new poem that I wrote called Hate Crime, which is published with Verne Journal recently as well this year. And it just basically kind of, how would I kind of put it into words? It's kind of just like basically breaks away this discriminatory slur, which is common in Mauritius from where I'm from, where this slur is against the LGBT plus communities there. And what I wanted to do is I just wanted to take away any power it sort of had to affect those people in my country. And I just wanted to make sure that I also embedded the English version in there, but also to strip it away of its power. Because obviously this is a hate crime against a minority of people, and the less power I'm able to kind of take away from these slurs, I feel the more better it is to kind of also demonstrate how important language is and the power that language has on people as well. So this is another recent piece called Anatomy. that I created last Sunday. And I talk about the two different French words, so delight and crime. And what I'm really kind of exploring in this piece here is how some people's delights are seen as criminal or a misdemeanor in certain countries. And really, I just wanted to kind of break away from that, from that kind of label and from that box, and just kind of really dissect the language to end with what is roughly translates to of, so something that's a whole or a part of. And I just really wanted to kind of separate these two kind of words to show that there's no correlation between them. So Birdman is I think my first published piece that I had with my university, Roehampton University, and it's published in their student anthology. And so Birdman is kind of really complex and is multi-layered, but essentially it is about a man with mental health issues who dresses up as a bird and has his carer kind of look after him when he goes on all these misadventures. It's a favorite poem of mine, and it's really fun to perform. And it always gets the crowd in good spirits when I perform it. And hopefully one day you guys will get to hear me perform it in a not too distant future. So next we've got Statistics. So this is another important poem that I wrote earlier in my career, and it's published with the London Reader. So this poem talks about how the Tory government at that time weren't really helping young people with ill mental health problems, or not give them the support that they needed. And I kind of use the UB40 song 1 in 10, but kind of reapply it to talk about the statistic of 1 in 10 young people dealing with ill mental health problems, because originally the song is about unemployment occurring in the late 80s. So I try and change that and related it to a harrowing statistic nowadays. So yeah, this is another really great poem to perform as well. And again, it always gets the crowd to kind of stop and think, and that's all I could really ask for that poem to do. So Let Me Be is one of the kind of first poems I wrote. I think I actually wrote it around my pamphlet because it features in I Want to Be the One You Think About at Night. I just really like the idea of how as lovers you become each other, or you adopt certain mannerisms between that are similar to each other, and the sense of becoming one. I think that's a really fascinating concept to kind of explore, and that's kind of the themes, some of the themes that my pamphlet explores. So moving on to my pamphlet. So in 2018, I was awarded a mentoring scheme with Waterloo Press called Lit Up, Poets of Colour. And this is where I kind of began my craft of developing a pamphlet, as well as focusing on my performance craft and also collaborating with the other poets around me. I decided I wanted to think about kind of focusing about love and all its various forms, because I just think it's a really kind of an ancient kind of theme that so many poets and so many writers have explored throughout time. And I just really liked how the many types of love can affect us as humans. And I got the name of the title from one of my favorite singers called Clairo, and her song Flaming Hot Cheetos, which has the line, I want to be the one you think about at night. And I think, again, this just, again, shows how much of an impact music and song lyrics have had on my own artistic career, to be able to kind of get me to respond to it in a way of writing poetry. Also, that song gave me the tools to kind of write the main poem, which is the title of this pamphlet as well. And I just really liked how Clairo talked about the romanticization of being thought of. And I think this is a really strong theme, especially in the poem, but across the pamphlet as well, about how much of your thoughts are dedicated to the person that you love, and how overwhelming that could be, and exhausting as well. So yeah, that's what I wanted to explore here. And I got my good friend Hayley Jenkins, who runs a small press called South Coast Station, to blurb the book. And so she's kind of written here the ways that I explore what I explore in the poem and my pamphlet. And I think she does a really good job of explaining what I do more than I could ever say or put into words. So yeah, she's great. And I think I think she actually published two of my first experimental pieces as well, Noses and Happy Birthday. So yeah, Hayley's been really great. So now I'm just going to talk through some reviews that I've got from the pamphlet. So I'm just going to read like selected bits. So this one is from Geeta Raleigh from Bad Form Review, and she calls this pamphlet a marvelously assured debut. I've got another review from Matt Richards from the London Grip, and he says, as we saw with the first poem, Jeetoo has a great way with an opening line, and one that I'd like to draw particular attention to is that of Elbow Kiss. If you've heard me perform Elbow Kiss before, many people have said that they've been really impacted by the message of Elbow Kiss. And again, this is only something I could ever dream of, for my readers to kind of actually kind of take back and kind of process my words and be impacted by them in a positive way. This is a recent review from Charlotte Gunn with Sphinx Review, and she just kind of just draws on like how my work is reminiscent of other themes in other kind of more famous pieces of literature, of poetry as well. I must say also I've got some more reviews coming up as well, and they will be kind of featured on my poetry page, my Instagram page at Jeetoo Poetry. So this really is where my kind of artistic career has really changed, and for the better as well. I've gone through a kind of rebirth, and I'm not the same person who I was before 2020. I think most of us can say that as well. And so really, I just wanted to capture my experience of my own rebirth and my own need for change in this poem, because I have been through what I would call, I don't know if I'm being dramatic, but I have been through hell. And so I did want to try and capture this in this poem to show that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And just like Maya Angelou, I rise, I rise, I rise. So now I'm just going to talk about co-headline events and performances from when I started in 2015 to the present day. So I performed at the John Hopkins lecture. That's where I performed Birdman, which is kind of it was a really kind of prestigious ceremony, and I performed Birdman, and I had so many reactions to the poem that not many people didn't know how to handle that poem, but I still stuck with my guns and I still performed it. And I was happy with the applause that I got. I also performed at Barnes Children's Literature Festival, and some many other events like Writing Our Legacy, which I co-headlined with one of my Waterloo Press Lit Up Poets of Colour alumni, Mary Williams. I also kind of performed at Nottingham Poetry Festival, and special events like Coin Operated Press, Food Not Bombs event, Front Room Poetry. I've also got a poetry performance tomorrow with Writing Our Word, which is also linked. There's a link to my Instagram page as well if you would like to attend that. So now I'm just going to talk about sound poetry. So sound poetry is, again, really important to me as a part of experimental writing. So I've been influenced through the works of Bob Cobbing, who is also from Enfield, and he likes to use recorded sounds in his work. And I aim to do this in my work too. I use auto-tune in my poetry sometimes, which was really fun and really silly. But I also use devices like Alexa in my poem, Alexa, Do You Love Me? Kind of using those devices to kind of engage in a dialogue with Alexa about who she loves, which features in my pamphlet. I also want to talk about the white space in poetry. So many of my favorite poets and contemporary poets use the white space and interrogate it as well. And I aim to do that in my writing too, because I want to make sure that if I'm isolating specific words, that I get my readers to be drawn in and become fascinated and perhaps maybe obsessed with the words that I'm getting them to be drawn in with. And also, I hate writing in traditional forms. I'm not someone of kind of formalities. I like kind of branching out and spreading my work across the page, and getting people to kind of react in a way where they can see past the kind of form that I use, but also kind of be drawn in it as well. Now I'm just going to talk about 3 particular works that have impacted my career thus far. So I have 2 short poems in Civic Leicester's Black Lives Matter, Poems for a New World. And these poems are so important, and I really wanted to try and express how I was feeling throughout this whole situation that happened last year with George Floyd, but also how I've noticed many of my my Black friends feeling throughout the history of time. And I wanted to express my thoughts on this with 2 poems called Police and The UK is Not Innocent. And I think this is a really good text for self-education. And I couldn't be more proud to have such work alongside some brilliant writers expressing our thoughts on this important theme. I've also got a poem in the Best New British and Irish Poets 2019 to 2021. And that poem is called The Death of Patroclus, where I kind of link Homer's the Iliad, a scene where Patroclus dies in Homer's the Iliad, with knife crime. And basically what I'm trying to get at with this poem is the idea that someone taking someone else's life is not a win. And actually it creates more tension and more fractures in society. And unfortunately, knife crime is a really severe ordeal that proportionally affects our young people across the world, but specifically in the UK. And I just wanted to capture how it's more ambitious in a way. I wanted to try and at least get close to how Homer kind of captured the really tragic pain and the loss that Achilles feels when his best friend has died due to someone else killing him. And I know some of my friends who have been affected by knife crime as well. And I've just tried to kind of link those 2 things together to try and raise awareness of this horrifying issue. I also got a poem in Tell Me Who We Were Before Life Made Us. So this is all about imagined histories and inspired by fairy tales, folklore, urban legends, creation myths, etc. And I wrote a poem about a Hawaiian folktale lore, which is basically how in a remote part of Hawaii, 2 teenagers fell in love on forbidden ground, and as a result, their teacher murdered them. And from that exact same spot, new paka plants grow side by side. So I thought it was really great kind of emblem and a reminder of how love can defy any obstacles as well. So I had to kind of put in a journal appreciation kind of slide in here, because these are the journals I've been written in throughout university, I think, and even sometimes before that. And these are not all the journals that I've collected over the years, but these are just like part of them as well. And I think why journals are important to me is because I can always kind of return to unfinished ideas or kind of steal some things or kind of put them into new pieces of poetry. So I like to collect a whole range of journals with my work. So now I'm just going to talk about some upcoming projects that I have. So I've got a podcast with Reaching for Eden Productions, which will be live streamed on Twitch, should be coming out in a couple of weeks. I'm also working with a filmmaker exploring men's mental health in A Swimming Pool God, which is a poem that I wrote based around the kind of hyper masculine kind of microcosm of kind of competitive swimming. I've got more publications in print and online magazines, and I've got more performances online for now. And I thought I would end today with this message I wrote to myself, age 13, when I was like really obsessed with like punk music, but also like Ellie Goulding at the time. And it says, I hope one day I can change the world because I have this feeling inside that I can do it. And when I was writing it at that time, I thought that I had to do something really big and grand to be able to change the world. But on reflection, now I can see that doing like little things or taking kind of baby steps has the biggest impact ever, rather than doing something major and big and hoping for it to have the hugest impact. So yeah, I think with that message, I just wanted to remind myself that actually that I can do little things and I can do what I want, which is writing poetry, and hopefully bit by bit change people's perceptions, perhaps get them to think differently. But other than that, I just hope I can just make the world a better place in whatever I do. And I think that's it for my artist talk. I hope you enjoyed it. And I hope you found something you could take away from it as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Aaron. And that was such a lovely message to end on, a very hopeful message. I really like it. Before before I open out the questions to everybody else, I just had a couple of questions. In my own practice, like I'm a materials person, I collect materials and I make artwork from like a specific bank of materials that I'm drawn to. I was wondering, do you have like a glossary of like favorite words or particular words that you're drawn to that you use in your poetry?
Yeah, definitely. I also have kind of like my favorite, all-time favorite poets as well, and their particular work that I have in a catalog. But in terms of words, I have there's like so many. I've collected them over the years from secondary school to university as well. And I think I kind of often use the words liminal, so like as in liminal spaces, like to connect to different areas. And there's like so many more that I have that I just can't remember the top of my head. But I think when I'm looking at those words, I want to kind of look at the different meanings that they have and kind of really be intentional when putting them in there to kind of, in a way, not as to trick the reader, but to kind of get them to think beyond what that specific word means and kind of expand their thinking, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I like that. Also, with your experimental poetry and your use of white space, do you ever like perform your experimental poetry? Like how would you go about performing them kind of poems?
Yeah, sure. So basically, let's say, for example, one of my poems, there's I kind of shift an individual word and kind of really kind of exaggerate the space in between. I would kind of pause for like a few seconds or for like a minute, just so that the audience or the readers kind of mull over the phrase that I've just left them with, and then go straight into it because there's no it's in jumblement, so kind of like no punctuation, so I can go straight into the next word, and then it kind of snaps them and then makes them alert to the next word. So that's how I would kind of like perform it.
Yeah, I like that process as well. Does anybody have any questions? Oh, Ryan, go for it.
Thank you, Aaron. I absolutely loved your talk and ended on such a sweet and sort of confident note as well, especially in the times we're going through, is just wonderful to hear. I am particularly drawn to your pieces where the words aren't in straight lines. They come off the page, they are at different angles, you have other imagery added. I just wanted to know about the creative process with that. And does the sort of composition, the visual composition, just sort of happen? Or do you have like a plan before you go to create something?
Yeah, sure. So it's kind of like 50-50. Sometimes I, like, for example, in my hate crime poem, where I'm kind of intentionally kind of breaking away the powers of those slurs, I'm going through my feelings. I kind of really intending to kind of break away all the power that those words have, and also try and space them out so that to make it difficult for the reader to kind of really kind of piece together like the whole sentence. But then sometimes I kind of just, I have a kind of like a backup plan or an idea of how I kind of want each word to be like on the different sides of spaces, or how I want them to be on the document. But then it just ends up being completely different to what I thought I wanted. And so I would say it's a 50-50 process. It really depends on how I'm feeling on the day, and if I kind of want to be leaving it the way it is, or if I want to be more intentional with it. Sometimes it's more me kind of being, okay, this is what I want to say. I'm just going to leave it like this and let the reader decide what they want to take from it. But I'm always careful to choose specific words that I want the reader to be thinking about, and then kind of leave them with it afterwards as well.
Brilliant, thank you.
We have a question in the chat from Andrea. She says, you mentioned that you're not a fan of traditional poetry, and that's why you use those spaces between words or areas of your poems. Do you think the white space is influencing the meaning of your work?
Oh, I really like that question. I think it does in a way, because I like to think of the blank Word document as my canvas, and painters or artists, they can obviously use the canvas how they wish. And I think sometimes when you're doing any sort of, if you're a writing artist, you have to feel like you have to stick to one specific side of the page. But I'm totally against that. I want to make sure that I'm using the document as much as I can as my own canvas, and really it's quite a contemporary kind of form that many writers have used, but not many that I have seen or read about kind of use the whole white document page. I'm sure there's artists out there who do that, but I think for me, when I'm kind of creating those spaces, it does override sometimes my initial thought process, and I do get carried away with trying to kind of shift all the words how I want them to be and how I would perform them as well. But yeah, that's a really great question. Thank you.
Bethan has a hand raised. Do you want to ask a question, Bethan?
Hi, thank you for talking for us tonight. It's so great to have like a different kind of artist. I think we've gone through looking at mainly visual artists the last few weeks, so having a poet's been like such a nice change for us. So obviously you do perform your poetry, but do you prefer it that the reader just reads the poem and takes their own interpretation of it, or that you perform it to them? Which is your preferred method?
So usually I would like to kind of perform my poetry to the reader, but it just depends on what the topic that I'm writing about. So for some of my political poetry, definitely I want to perform, not kind of like perform it at you, like you must listen to this, but in a way to kind of show you the emotions that I'm going through when I'm performing, so that you kind of feel what maybe kind of like a semblance of what I'm trying to express. But I think for some other types of poetry, like the ones that are quite not so intense but have a big impact or meaning, I want readers to kind of discover for themselves, and kind of take what they want from it. So yeah, it's a mix of match, but definitely when I feel like there's something that has really annoyed me in the world, or something, or any type of injustice, I want to kind of perform it, and kind of show you how it's impacting us, and how we're surrounded by it. So yeah.
We have another question from Andrea, a couple actually. What do you like about zombies?
I think there's something actually really poetic about how the dead come back again, and it's also there's so many different types of zombies as well. There's the ones that eat brains. There's the ones that are slow and eat your flesh, and then there's these kind of weird hybrid kind of ones where they're like really, really fast and like they just jump on you and stuff like that. So there's loads of different types of zombies, but I just really like the idea that the sense, again, is quite poetic, that you can never really die, that that you can come back to life as a rotting corpse and just go about your day eating other rotting corpses. I just think it's just so poetic. Something about that is it's just stuck with me since childhood.
What's your creative process like, and do you write on paper or do you create digitally? That's another question from Andrea.
Okay, cool. So I sometimes it's really hard to kind of find the time to write in a notebook or on paper, now that I'm obviously kind of like an adult and have my vocation to focus on it, etc. But when I was a teenager, I probably had more time to be able to write in notebooks, etc. So for now, it's more kind of writing digitally and using the Microsoft Word or any kind of digital notepad to write down some ideas. And my creative process is mainly I like to kind of figure out what I want to be talking about. So I do my research. So I just research topics with credible sources, making sure that I'm handling the subjects that I'm looking at with sensitivity and care, and making sure that the representation is important as well in who I'm talking about or what experience I've gone through that I'm applying to a wider kind of idea. And then I like to go through some free writing. So I spend 10 minutes. This is where I actually bring my journals and notebooks back. I write nonstop for 10 minutes without thinking about grammar, punctuation, or if it makes sense. And then after the 10 minutes are up, I underline keywords and key phrases that I kind of use for stimuli or prompts in my writing. And then it's just the process of editing and redrafting, which takes a really long time. So that includes kind of reading out the poem, which I often read out my poems to my cat, and I kind of know if I hit a good line when his ears go up. That's how I know I've hit a really good line. But also I use Google Translator to hear my poetry, or I send them to a workshop community of trusted writers that I've known for a long time, or I send it to a group of trusted readers who don't usually read poetry, which I thought would be really helpful for me to do, so I can get some different ideas from people who don't normally kind of enter those spaces. So yeah, that's pretty much my creative process.
Another question from Bethan.
Yes, obviously you published your book, I Want to Be the One You Think About at Night. Do you see yourself publishing more books of your writing?
Yeah, oh, definitely. I think when the time is right, I think now, usually how I was taught how poets kind of build their career from my university lecturer, which could also be quite biased, but basically what's usual for poets is to kind of create a portfolio of work, then publish a book. But I kind of like did the opposite. I just kind of went straight in writing experimental poetry, and then ended up somehow, I don't know, I just ended up kind of putting out a book at that time, and then kind of building more poetry after that. And I can't really fault that process. That's what happened at the time. I was grateful for that opportunity. But I am definitely working on some kind of ideas for new books, and hopefully they should come out when I feel ready and when I feel like it's the right time for them to come out as well.
And will you be coming back to our open mic night anytime soon? Because we'd love to hear more of your poems performed for us.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. I think I didn't know what to expect in that open mic night when I first was introduced to you guys, but it was such a fantastic night, and it was also really hilarious for so many reasons. But yeah, I would definitely love to come back. I feel like I've made a really good kind of connection with you guys, and I love what you do in promoting artists, and yeah, you guys are great.
Oh, there's such lovely comments. We really enjoyed having you. And our open mic nights have increased a little bit in numbers since our opening debut, which has been fantastic. Andrea has another question. Can you talk a bit more about Nocturnal, please? I'm really intrigued by the use of symbols and spaces.
Yeah, so maybe I can try and get it up really quickly because I wrote it when in 2017 and I should be able to kind of remember what it's about, but sometimes it just escapes me. But I do know, oh, here we go. But I do know I saw a particular phrase about how money can control people and kind of manipulate them as well. And I just wanted to kind of explore how much value the pound sign has to us in terms of how we live as human beings and how we use it and how we kind of are surrounded by it and how it kind of makes us as human beings. And I just wanted to kind of really just manipulate that and kind of exaggerate that as well. Obviously the words here are from, I can't remember who said it, but I do quote them as well. And again, it's just to reiterate with the speech marks there, this exaggeration of how much of our lives are connected to money, how it's mind controlling, and how the patriarchy just establishes all those things, and how all these systems are still in place, and they're so ancient and outdated, and we're still ruled by them. So I just wanted to kind of express all those things, all those kind of things that I feel that don't make us, but influence us as human beings.
Has anybody else got any more questions? If not, I think we'll wrap it up there, if that's okay. Thank you so much, Aaron, for doing this talk. It's been so refreshing to hear from a non-visual artist as a little break. And I definitely see like the Jenny Holzer influence in there. She's one of my favorite artists.
Oh, cool. Thank you. That means a lot.
It's all right. So thank you everybody for coming. We have Becky Atherton's artist talk next week, same time. Also, don't forget about our open mic night on the 9th of June if you want to attend. So thank you everybody for coming. Bye.
Thank you very much, everyone.